The reason the book After Zionism came out was because the conversation started a few years ago with Mondoweiss, which is a well-known American website about the Middle East, about trying to say that the two-state solution discussion is always very tight, it doesn't really go anywhere. We're talking about a peace process. The mainstream media routinely doesn't really go into depth about alternatives. And the one-state solution, which has always existed as an idea, was being very much on the fringes, but in the last few years has become much more prominent, both in the Palestinian community and elements of the Jewish community as well. So we wanted to put together a collection of Jews, Palestinians, Arabs, atheists from all over the world, Middle East, the US, Australia, to look at practical ways to make the one-state solution happen. Say the only democratic way to bring peace in the Middle East and Israel-Palestine is this solution, the only way, and we want to find out a way to make it seem both possible but also achievable soon. We wanted to have original essays by writers, some of whom are very well known, of course, some of whom are less known, but most people who are interested in this issue, we feel it's a collection that people could access who don't have massive amounts of knowledge about the issue. Obviously, it presumes some knowledge about the conflict, what's happening in general, but it certainly allows people, I think, who don't know much about the issue. And one of the things that's been interesting for me is often when you talk to people about this situation, even the thought of a one-state solution is not really in the mainstream dialogue. All you hear is two-state solution, peace process, US and Palestinians, Israel, the EU, etc., Arab League. So there's not really a practical way to make it happen. So for us, we want to get people who knew the conflict, some of whom either spent a lot of time in Israel or Palestine, or of course in the US, where the debate in some ways arguably is as important, if not more so, than in the Middle East itself. And it was important obviously to get Jews and Palestinians. And because my co-editor, Ahmed, is Palestinian, it wasn't done in a kind of kumbaya way of saying that, you know, we can all get on and hug and make peace. There are differences. Ahmed and I have differences ourselves. His background is a Palestinian refugee from the Middle East. I'm a Jewish Australian. So our backgrounds could not be more different. But what we do agree on, and many of the writers who don't all agree, and many of the writers wouldn't agree with each other. There's no one way to bring a one-state solution. We were keen to sort of say that there are different models and different ways to do this, and to reject what is often the criticism by opponents to sort of say, how is it just that Jews aren't allowed to have their own state? And as someone who's Jewish myself, my view has always been Jews have every right to live anywhere they want in the world legally and safely. That's not the issue. The issue is that Israel, since 48, and even more so since 67, has very much been about oppressing people in the name of Judaism, in the name of security for themselves on the back of other people. And that's, to me, not a just outcome.
Working with the individual authors was a big pleasure. Everybody was wonderful to work with. We don't see eye to eye with everybody who contributed, and that really underpins the purpose of the book, the fact that we're engaging in a conversation about something that's really a nascent movement. There have been ideas about one state for as long as the Palestinian-Israeli conflict has existed, but at the current juncture, where the end of two states, the end of the Oslo process, is reality on the ground, well, it's just kind of a nascent movement. And so, yeah, there are views that we agree with, there are views that we don't agree with, there are things that Antony and I don't agree with, I mean, between us. But again, the purpose is to have conversation. So we wanted to get a range of not just the views, but also different kinds of treatments. And so some of our writers are more academically or analytically oriented. We have a few journalists who do an excellent job of portraying or conveying the way that things are now on the ground. When we thought about putting the collection together, our main purpose was about giving kind of, not exactly the uninitiated reader, but somebody who knows something about the conflict, a broad view across a number of dimensions and also depth. Working with the writers was extraordinary. I mean, I learned a lot throughout the process. Everybody, I'm awed by the fact that we got so many great great people involved. This is a collaborative undertaking that is just getting off the ground now, and that's what this book signifies, and that's what it was meant to be when we began to think about it. Today, there are creative and well-intentioned Palestinians and Israelis and others who are working together to imagine what one state could look like, and to think about the processes that could yield that state.
It's one of these classic cases. He and I have never met, and I say this now in early August 2012. I can't speak for Ahmed, he can speak for himself, but for me it was very much the idea of saying that with two people with such profoundly different backgrounds, different histories, different families, different beliefs in some ways, that we can come together and edit a collection which has a variety of views that believes ultimately that both peoples, Israelis and Palestinians, should be living together, can only live together peacefully. And it's not utopian to say that, despite the fact that many say it is. So our process was a lot of talking, a lot of editing, a lot of discussion about the vision, obviously finding a publisher who would be supportive of the material, knowing that the issue is controversial, knowing that many people in the mainstream communities, particularly in the Jewish community, reject a one-state solution because they like the idea of Jewish privilege, and I, as a Jew, don't think that's a very just outcome. So yes, it was a classic modern enterprise that we've never met yet, but it's worked very well.
Antony and I have been working on this project together since 2009, the fall of 2009, and so we've gotten to know one another, I think, reasonably well through Skype and other electronic forms of engagement. He's a great guy. I don't have to meet him personally to know that, and he's delightful to work with, and yeah, again, very lucky to work with him on this project.
One of the things that a two-state solution does, putting aside the issue of justice for both peoples, is the fact that you have 20% of Palestinian Arabs who live in Israel proper. So the idea somehow that they would be forced to accept the narrative of Zionism and the narrative of a two-state solution, I think, is inherently unjust. So a one-state solution really says, in the modern age, in the 21st century, the concept of partition is clearly, in my view, and many of the people in the collection, anachronism. So to suggest a one-state solution, but not in an idealistic group hug way, clearly there are issues to get past. Clearly there are 60 years of conflict and tension. No one's saying that tomorrow, if there was a one-state solution, things would be ideal.
Somebody like me, it's always been about equal rights. I think that's the best model anywhere. Right? But here in Palestine, Israel, kind of hard-nosed realism. 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, people may have said, well, two states is the only way to go. Partition is the only way to go. The militarily superior party, the Israelis, would never consent to anything like the end of what they've built for themselves in Palestine. The Israelis would never consent to anything binational. But the reality's changed in deep and permanent ways, I think. 600,000 Jewish settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem are never going to move. They live there now. Their numbers are growing. There's no incentive for them to leave, and even if there was an incentive for them to leave, I think the number of them who are ideological is understated. That is, they're more married to the idea of a Jewish presence on what they believe is the biblical homeland than they are to the idea of a modern political state of Israel. The settlers aren't going anywhere. The issue of water isn't going away, and the issue of security isn't going away either.
The one-state solution in Israel-Palestine requires laws and justice to make both sides equally accountable, but ultimately it's majority rule. So not to suggest that the real test of a society is always, in my view, how it treats its minorities. And in Palestine and Israel, the Palestinians today are not just discriminated against because they're Arab, But a two-state solution actually puts that into law. And we think that a one-state solution with checks and balances is the best way. And again, the book goes into many details about how to achieve that practically. Many of you may not have heard about the idea of a one-state solution, some of you will have, but it's too easily dismissed often as utopian, that somehow there's no way after decades and decades of conflict and war that Jews and Palestinians could live together. And we don't for a second in the book or any of the writers say that there aren't massive challenges to make that happen, but the book, I think, gives a really, not a roadmap of only one road, but a variety of ways to say that to reframe the narrative around this kind of idea is the only just outcome, particularly when you see that just recently Israel has no intention ever of allowing a Palestinian state. For the there's a recent Israeli government commission which said the occupation wasn't even an occupation. So that if that's the mindset that we're dealing with, I think it's important that we recognise that the Jewish community does not speak with one voice on this question, that there are growing numbers of dissenters who say that this sort of book is important, and it's vital that Jews are seen as supporting democracy as opposed to discrimination based on a Jewish state. So I would say to readers to enjoy and hopefully be provoked.